Welcome, everyone. Hello. So we're looking into the report that was released on the 16th of September about Eritrean refugees in Tigray. And it was the report that came out by Human Rights Watch. What we're trying to do is here look into the findings of the report. So to just set us for the evening, I would read the first few paragraphs, and then we see what was happening and how these problems escalated and how the refugees in Tigray became victims. The report starts by saying Eritrean government forces and Tigrayan militias have committed killing, rape, and other grave abuse against Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Human Rights Watch said today all warning parties should cease attacks against refugees, stay out of refugee camps, and facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid. Between November 2020 and January 2021, belligerent Eritrean and Tigrayan forces alternatively occupied the Hitsats and Shimalba refugee camps that housed thousands of Eritrean refugees and committed numerous abuses. Eritrean forces also targeted Tigrayans living in communities surrounding the camps. Fighting that broke out in mid-July and in Ma'ini and Ad-Harush, the two other functioning refugee camps, again left refugees in urgent need of protection and assistance. Eritrean refugees have been attacked both by the very forces they fled back home and by Tigrayan fighters, said Latita Badr, Horn of Africa director at Human Rights Watch. The horrific killings, rape, and looting against Eritrean refugees in Tigray are evident war crimes. Since January, Human Rights Watch has interviewed 28 Eritrean refugees, 23 former residents of Hitsats camp, and 5 former residents of Shimalba camp, and 2 residents of the town of Hitsats who had witnessed the abuses by Eritrean forces and local Tigrayan militias. Human Rights Watch also interviewed aid worker and analyzed satellite imagery. So this is just like outline how this report was collected, and the findings were collected, and they just telling us the source for their findings. Human Rights Watch sent letters summarizing the findings and requesting further information to Ethiopian Agency for Refugees and Returnees Affairs, the United Nations Refugee Agency, Eritrea's permanent mission to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, responses from ARRA, the Ethiopian Agency for Refugees, and UNHCR are included below. Eritrea did not respond. They're saying that the Eritrean government hasn't responded to this report. And obviously these letters were sent back in July to these different organizations, so they had more than enough. They weren't sent to them just before the report was released, but just before then. And the outcry that we saw from Higdef and the Eritrean government, or the Eritrean supporters for the Eritrean refugees in Tigray, was just a crocodile tears. It's just a lie that they wanted to make us believe that they care about the Eritrean refugees. So in the report outlines follows a specific timeline starting in November and ending in January. So I'm just gonna stop there. These are the first paragraphs of the report, and also I would ask Brambras and Tesfu and Mira if you guys read the report and you want to have anything to contribute with.
Well, I read just part of the report, so I didn't finish reading, but I find it very concerning, especially, but it looks like, from my perspective, it looks like that the Eritrean government was doing that intentionally, while on the Tigray side, it looks a little bit non-organized, because at that time, the government, the defense or the Tigray defense force have not been started. So I'm not trying to minimize it. They were killing indiscriminately, but it looks like it was a little bit unorganized from the Tigray side, while from the Eritrean, it looks it was very organized, intentional, trying to stoke the hate between the two communities, and they look like they have succeeded on what they wanted. That's what my understanding.
Yeah, it could be, but at the end of the day, I think even if they're militia, these are civilians, and you can tell these are civilians, and they knew that these are refugee camps. And you're right. I do disagree. I do agree with you. Maybe it wasn't as organized, but at the end of the day, I think there should be some sort of responsibility that should, as a fighter, you can easily differentiate between a civilian and fighters. Let's just read a bit of what the report says from November. It says, on November 19, Eritrean forces arrived in the town of Hitzat and indiscriminately killed several residents. They occupied and pillaged the town and took over refugee camps. Some refugees took part in the looting, contributing to community tensions. On November 23rd, Tigrayan militias, so on the 19th, the Eritrean forces arrived in the town of Hitzat, yeah? And then on the 23rd of November, Tigrayan militias entered Hitzat's camp and attacked refugees near the camp's Orthodox church. Clash between the militia fighters and Eritrean soldiers ensued in and around the camp, lasting several hours. 9 refugees were killed and 17 badly injured. So this is what we're talking about on the 23rd. On the 23rd, there was a fight between the Eritrean and Tigrayan militias, the Eritrean military forces and Tigrayan militias in Hitzat. And 9 refugees were killed and 17 were badly injured. One refugee said that Tigrayan militia fighters killed her husband as their family tried to seek shelter inside the church. So that's the church that is near the refugee camps. My husband had our 4-year-old on his back and our 6-year-old in his arms. As he came back to help me enter the church, they shot him. So now, she's saying Tigrayan militias, but they shot him on her husband, and that's in Hitzat again. 2 dozens residents in Hitzat town were also reportedly killed during and after clash that day. The Tigrayan militia retreated from Hitzat after the fighting. That's the 23rd, yeah? Eritrean forces later detained approximately 2 dozen refugees in the camp and took them away in military vehicles. Their whereabouts have not been revealed. Eritrean forces also removed the 17 injured refugees from the camp, taking at least one, and likely others, back to Eritrea, ostensibly for treatment. So they took some of the refugees, so the 17 refugees with them to Eritrea. And if you guys remember back, there was a report by I think Meron was the first to publish it, and it wasn't a report, just like a statement that she made, that Eritrean government has taken some of the Eritrean refugees to Eritrea, and this report is confirming that this information. So the information that we had was like Eritrean refugees were taken from Tigray to Eritrea, and I guess the part that we should be looking into is yes, war is war, but at the same time, regardless of who is on the side, I think there should be some sort of respect for the civilians, and also respect for the international humanitarian law that regulates war and the interaction with civilians, and that hasn't been upheld, because some of the fight was taking place in in the camp. So by the looks of it, that there were some of the reason that the Tigrayan forces were kind of attacking the camp just because there was some of the Eritrean forces were stationed either in it or next to it. So that's why they had to. There was a fight that was taking place next to the Hetzat refugee camp. I'm just gonna. The reason I'm trying to not say words that are not mine, so I'm trying to keep to the report. At least we can discuss what's been said, and because the end of the day, the people who wrote this report, they have the the information more than we do. So the Eritrean forces withdrew from the camp in early December. So Eritreans, by the looks of it, Eritreans arrived on the 17th, yeah, and they stayed there till December. So they stayed there for almost 2 weeks. Tigrayan forces returned on the evening of December 5th, shooting into the camp and sending hundreds of refugees fleeing. So Eritrean forces leave the camp. So now I think Barambaras, what you were saying and you pointed here, I think it's not. So the approach that the Eritrean forces had is the same as the approach that the Tigrayan militias had when they arrived on early December, because Eritrean forces didn't know who is in the camp. They just they knew this is a refugee camp. They knew these are Eritreans, and they targeted them just because of that. Similarly, on December 5th, Tigrayan forces returned on the evening of December 5th, shooting into the camp and sending hundreds of refugees fleeing. In the ensuing days, Tigrayan militias attacked, arbitrarily detained, and sexually assaulted some of the refugees who had fled, notably around Zalazale and Ziban Gadana, north of Hetzat. They then marched the refugees back to Hetzat. So they're taking them, and because they're fleeing, so they kind of taken them, and I think some of these sexual assaults took place outside the camp, and then they're taking them back to the camp. They marched the refugees back to the camp, and these are refugees who flew the camps just because the Tigrayan force came and they were shooting at the camp, which is very disturbing, because they don't want them to be spread around Tigray, or maybe flee for their lives. So they brought them back to the camp. So it's just still they try and they wanted to hold them in the refugee camps. One of the women, who was a 27-year-old woman, said, "I'm a double victim, whom Tigray militia fighters raped along with her 17-year-old sister while they fled Hetzat. Both in Eritrea and now here, I am not protected." So this 27-year-old lady, she was raped with her 17-year-old sister. It's not even an underage, under the legal age girl. These are very distressing reports, to be honest. In Hetzat, Tigray militias and special forces and members of an unidentified armed Eritrean groups arbitrarily detained hundreds of refugees, apparently to identify refugees who collaborated with the Eritrean forces or who were responsible for looting in the town. On January 4th, following heavy clash near the camp, Tigrayan forces withdrew from Hetzat. The Eritrean forces returned and ordered all remaining refugees to leave along the main road towards Eritrea between January 5th and 8th. Eritrean forces destroyed and burned shelters and humanitarian infrastructure in the camp, leaving significant parts of the camp in ruins. So this is all the way until the beginning of January. So Tigrayans and Eritreans, the Tigrayan militias and Eritreans, were kind of back and forth, but primarily the control was for Eritreans. So in December, on early December, Eritreans left, and then 5th of December, the Tigray militia came back, and then again, beginning of January, the Eritreans came back again, and so it's just back and forth between the two, and these refugees found themselves stuck, in these refugee camps where they could do nothing, and even way out wasn't there, and it wasn't possible for them to leave. So that's maybe if you guys have any reflections to make, also people in the audience, if you want to have any reflections to make as we go through the report, please do raise your hand, come up stage, and say a few things. Brombras, maybe Amira, Tesfu. No, Tesfu said he's busy. Yeah.
Actually, I could start. There was one sentence you just read. On November 19, Eritrean forces arrived in the town of Hessas and indiscriminately killed several residents. They occupied and pillaged the town and took over the refugee camp. Some refugees took part in the looting, contributing to community tensions. So it looks like that some refugees were intentionally part of the looting. And I suppose that are probably infiltrated from the Eritrean government. I don't think a normal, the average Eritrean refugee would be happy to loot the community that have helped. And I don't exactly remember where. I also read somewhere where some refugees were helping the Eritrean military, pointing out the people that are important for them to arrest. So it looks like there was some kind of collaboration from the refugees against the people of Tigray. But my understanding is they are probably people that were sent earlier by the Eritrean government. That's my understanding, even though it's difficult to verify. And there is also one point in about the 28-year-old refugee talking about how the Tigrayan militia stopped him with two friends when he was heading to the church. And what they told him is written very clearly. They didn't give us much time. They said, your Sha'biya are killing us and you have the luxury of going to church. My cousin was the first person injured, not a serious injury at first, but then he tried to escape and they shot him again. This is when I fled toward the church. Once inside, we locked the door. Thankfully, they didn't enter. So it looks like there was some tension there. So it looks like that the militia saw the Eritreans as a revenge. So even though they were a minority part of the refugees were helping the Eritrean government, I think what we are seeing here is that the militia who were supposed to protect the Eritrean refugees were actually attacking them and misusing their force just because they have force. They in one instance, for example, they talk about I think they talk about indiscriminately killing refugees, which is not acceptable by any means necessary, by any reason. So I really feel the pain. I really feel how hard it is, because it looks like the refugees are hated by both sides, who are having gun, who have weapons in their hand, and it's really very difficult even to imagine, because I myself am a former refugee, and it could have been me in this situation, and I don't think what would happen.
Yeah, just to give that more clarity, I believe the Eritrean, you can't say that the refugees. Obviously, that in practice, that maybe that is what's happened. But if they're gonna order them to take, because the report goes on to detail what's happened from November 19th to the 23rd. So, for example, in one of the paragraphs, it says Eritrean soldiers also looted Hitzat's town for several days following their takeover, in some cases accompanied by refugees. So these soldiers, they didn't know anything about Hitzat. They never been to Hitzat, but obviously the refugees are familiar with Hitzat, so they have to take them as a guide, and that doesn't mean that they were collaborating with the Eritrean refugees, but with the Eritrean military or force personnel, they would force them to do so, and it's not something that for people who know how the military operates in Eritrea, this is the least they could do. They took these refugees and they took them as a guide into the city. So the eyewitness said the Eritrean refugees were looting everything. Sorry, the Eritrean soldiers were looting everything, including sugar, juice, water from the shops. They butchered the animals, one refugee said. A local resident saw some refugees pointing out the houses of militia members and members of the town's administrations to the Eritrean forces during house-to-house search. This is an eyewitness, someone saying, we're going to have to take it with a grain of salt because from my understanding, most of the time the refugees were kept in the refugee camps, and them leaving the refugees most of the time is not an easy thing to do. And saying that they took them to the militia members' houses and all of that, they don't necessarily know this, militia, unless these are, as you said, informants who were already there, who were sent by the Eritrean government prior to the war to investigate. So you can't say these are just refugees. We're not here saying that the Eritrean refugees might not have collaborated. What we're trying to say is there could be a different narrative to the issues, because this is an eyewitness, a person saying that. And the possibilities, we are open to both possibilities of this being the refugees or some of the people who are refugees collaborating. The second possibility is just they had been forced to collaborate, otherwise they would kill them. And the third would be informants of the Eritrean government who were sent as refugees to Tigray prior to the war. So all these are possible outcomes. So and for someone who is just observing, they would report what they've seen, but they don't know what's the reality of everything. Hi everyone, we are looking into the report that was published by, we're gonna reset the room. We look into the report that was published by Human Rights Watch about Eritrean refugees in Tigray. The report was published on the 16th of September. And it looks in detail from into the state of Eritrean refugees from the beginning of November all the way until January. And it follows the timeline of events and incidents that took place, and the whereabouts of a lot of people were traced, and the different refugee camps are and events and incidents that took place in these different refugee camps are traced. There's a details kind of outline of what happened, following a specific timeline within specific days and dates, and we're trying to look into them and see if we can gain some insight into what was happening. Obviously, for those of you who weren't here with us, the Human Rights Watch sent a few questions. We'll read them in a minute to the Eritrean government and also the UNHCR and the Ethiopian refugee body. The Eritrean government hasn't responded. So whatever they were saying previously a few weeks ago about Eritrean refugees in Tigray is baseless, and they can't make the argument for the Eritrean refugees, because Eritrean government and the Eritrean military is the least responsible about the refugees, and if anything, they are responsible for the crimes that have been committed against them. But for those of you who want to follow as well, you can find the report on the Human Rights Watch organization. It's called Ethiopian Eritrean Refugees Targeted in Tigray. So this is the title of the report. You can follow it. Hi, Mohammed. Do you have anything to add?
Hi, Ismail. Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, I literally just stepped away for like 7 minutes, and I was just working on something, so I wasn't paying attention. I hope my question is not redundant. So along the same lines of Borambra's questioning surrounding the intent and impact, I mean, as far as like the destruction, devastation of these refugee camps, do you think these attacks, is it because of perceived like collaboration with TDF, TPLF, or is it like political blackmail against Eritrea or Hegedef? And then also,
Okay, sorry, could you start from the beginning? Sorry, I didn't pay attention to the first part of your question.
Yeah, I was asking Ismail, and I think I heard part of your question, but I didn't hear it fully. So I was asking about these attacks, for example, if it's perpetrated by EDF, the Eritrean Defense Forces, is it because of the political blackmail, like with perceived political blackmail, with the whole like refugee exodus, or is this perceived collaboration, by TPLF, or vice versa, with like, right, are the militias thinking, or the EDF thinking that the refugees are siding with one side force or the other force? And then also I hope that you got that. And then my second question is what do you think about I think it's the EEPA, Europe External Program with Africa. They had like countering reports in opposition of the Ethiopian TV about extrajudicial killings of like 300 Eritreans by EDF about the shoot to kill policy. Can you speak on that, Ismail or Barnabas? I hope my questions are clear.
Ismail, do you want to start, or I could start?
Go ahead, Barnabas. You can go.
If I understand correctly, first I have to say, I just came to this group as an individual, so I'm not invited to speak, or nobody should connect my speech with the moderators in any way. So if I understand the second question, I understand the first question. If I understand it correctly, the question is, what was the reason behind for the militia who were attacking the Eritrean refugees in the camps, right?
Yeah, either EDF purportedly, or the Tigray militia.
Well, it's first I have to be clear that I'm trying to guess from the knowledge that I have. So definitely, it doesn't mean that everything I'm saying is correct. But I think the Eritrean Defense Forces, they have the reason to attack the military camps, because the two military camps that are totally destroyed were near the border. So even though the other two, the Ethiopian and the Eritrean, were able to control almost the whole of Tigray in 3 weeks, but they didn't care about the other two refugees, because the other two refugees are between the border of Tigray and Amhara, while the two that are destroyed are near the border to Eritrea. So they don't want use to be in the border, right, Eritrea, beside Eritrea, and it will be easy for anything to happen to them. So I suppose the Eritreans were seeing this as a security threat. And if it wasn't that, they wouldn't only just take people, but what they did was they destroyed totally, and the Ethiopian government announced that the camps will be closed once and for all. So they are officially closed, the two camps. So my understanding is the Eritreans, they were responding to their military threat for the dictators' future, I suppose. And they were in Tigray because they had a peace agreement, or I don't know if it was a war agreement, but they had an agreement with Abiy. We can call it peace or war. It depends maybe who you ask. And but on the Tigray side, it's difficult for me to say very definitely. But the Eritreans have lived there peacefully for 10 at least years. So what happened, what shifted, is even if even though there are some claims that the Eritrean refugees helped showing them, I don't think it is I suppose, I think my firm understanding is that they are people that were sent as spies or to observe or force it. So I don't see it like they were betraying the host community in any means, even though some people might say that. But my understanding is this is a revenge that the militia were taking on the refugees, because it was already written actually on the report. When they shot the person that was walking to the church, what they said to him was, "You are allowed. You have the luxury to go to church." And the reason they were saying were the Eritreans were not just helping Abiy to control political power over Tigray. They were intentionally killing innocent people, raping, destroying church, mosques. So in a way, the militia took to their hands the revenge, the hate of Eritreans, and unfortunately, the refugees were hated by both sides. So what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to make it reasonable what they are doing, but even though it's totally unreasonable, it should have a reason why they were suddenly killing, raping the people that they have taken care of for over 10 years. And on the second one that he said about 300 and plus, I think that one was the one that Georges, or I don't know his name, from America was talking about. And it's not still clear. So it was not 300 people died. I think the news was there were 300 plus people waiting in Shira to get transported to the Eritrean refugee camp. And that was in the beginning when the Eritrean fighters left, and the Tigray Defense Forces or the militia were there, the first ones, and they are accused of killing people indiscriminately. The thing is that the UNHCR have tried in the beginning to address this part, and they didn't say it didn't happen, but they say that they couldn't find facts on the ground showing that this has happened. So how many people are killed from these 300? That is not clear until now. So George have come as for an interview. I think it was in Tefatau show, and what he said was, "We are still waiting for the facts. We are still waiting for investigation." So I think the investigation would have come out light if all people were killed. I don't think the days was 300, but he said clearly that 300 plus were the number of refugees they were waiting there. So how many people were there? How many people were hit by the Tigray Defense Forces or by the militia? But as is shown in the report, Getachew Reda, which is the spokesperson for the Tigray Defense Forces, he said that some vigilant groups from the militias have acted on their own. So this, in a way, shows that the Tigrayan militias or the Tigray Defense Force have acknowledged, they have accepted that there was things that were done from their part that was not acceptable. So the next question is, were those people, did these people do it, as he said, vigilant, or was there something that was institutionalized? And what did happen? And so this needs to be investigated, I believe. So sorry if I try to answer in a very long discussion. I hope I haven't bored people around. And if anybody knows anything more than me, maybe, then you are welcome to correct me if I have said some facts wrong.
Oh, no, thank you, man. But just to add quickly, Mohammed, to your question, first thing, I think we need to realize that militia, in its nature, are just a group of civilians who joined the army due to the conditions that they saw, and saw fit that maybe joining the army would, I guess, protect the individuals. That's the first thing. So they're not trained military forces. They're more civilians who joined the army. So when it comes to the point of revenge that Maron mentioned, I see that being the reason, first of all. I don't believe this was done to blackmail or to put any pressure or any sort of pressure on the Eritrean government, because they simply do not care about the refugees in the region or any of the Eritreans in the region. So I don't believe it was the intention wasn't to put pressure on the government or have them care about the refugees, because as the report states, the Eritrean army was also attacking the refugees themselves. So just to add to Mariam's points, I think it might have been more on the grounds of revenge and not really a planned attack to influence the actions of the Eritrean government in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, I hope that answers the question a bit.
Thank you, Mira.
Also, I think in terms of the Eritrean government, I don't think they care less about the Eritrean refugees. If anything, they wanted them to return. They did return some of them. We have over 7,000 people missing right now as we speak, and accounted for. Some of them will probably die. Some of them will probably taken back. So I don't think the Eritrean military forces could care less or maybe blackmailed about the Eritrean refugees. If they die, they would die. They probably killed some of the Eritrean refugees as well. The military. So yeah, that's for me. Is the blackmailing issue is not there. When it comes to one of the things, though, yes, we have the militias, but we need to understand as after the war erupted, the Tigrayan militias were also considered to be part of the Tigrayan Defense Forces. So this is one thing that we need to. Maybe they were not under the command, because this is happening early November and things were not very clear, and also even a lot of the Tigrayan defense force that was created as of then when the war erupted, a lot of them kind of withdrew to the mountains. So they were still under the command of TDF, and they still are under the command of TDF, and that's one thing that we need to, when we're having the discussion, we need to understand that even the Tigrayan militias are considered to be under the command of TDF, and that's a lot. That's also the narrative that's been pushed by I believe a lot of Tigrayans, because it's not TPLF which is fighting, it's the TDF, it's the Tigrayan Defense Force, and I guess when it comes to accountability. As we say, Eritrean forces or who committed crimes should be held accountable. The same thing, anyone who committed crimes against the refugees should be held accountable. And I think TDF and TPLF as a driving force for this should, take action when it comes to accountability. So yeah, I just wanted to inject that idea of because we would have at some point after this war is over, people will be looking at accountability on both sides, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's quite unfortunate that the refugees have been left to almost fend for themselves in a region that's very unsafe for them. But the question is, do you think the UN or any of these humanitarian organizations could have done anything to prevent? Because I don't think it takes a genius to realize that these people would have been left in the crossfires, right? Is there anything you could have done to protect and ensure the safety of the refugees, or would that have been out of the question? I think that I would ask.
I think that's for me personally. I think that's out of the question, because first of all, there's so many predictions. Will the war start? Will it not start? There's so many things there's so many conversations that were taking place. Will the Ethiopian National Defense Force attacked Tigray? That's prior to November 4th. Yes, things were escalating very fast, but at the same time, people were kind of hesitant whether the war start or not. So that's there. Secondly, in terms of the region was in a way a closed war zone for the first, at least for the first few weeks, and no one knew what was happening. Maybe there's some responsibility that should be shared by the central government, the federal government of Ethiopia, because of the closure of internet and any communication. People were unable to get to the heart of what was happening. So, had the world knew about it, maybe some of the the UN or any other UNHCR or other parties would have probably taken action. But it is I believe the action wasn't a very easy thing to do, and I guess that tells you how, like, these people were stuck, and they were left stuck, and they were targeted specifically. They were targeted by the Eritreans, and also they were targeted by the Tigrayans. So they became double victims of both sides. The Eritreans would see them as the traitors, and the Tigrayans would just, especially the militias, would just want to retaliate, nothing more. So yeah, I guess if that's for Brambras have anything to add with the, I was just trying to look into what happened on the fighting that took place on the 23rd. In the initial days, the report said there was no fighting in Hetzat's camp in the initial days of Eritrean occupation. The Eritrean force set up tents inside the camp, established bases at the UNHCR area and other humanitarian offices, where they also looted humanitarian equipment. Refugees said soldiers pressured them to return to Eritrea, warning them that they would not be safe in the camp and that the host community was planning to kill them. So there was a possibility for a lot of the refugees to exit the camp, but I'm not sure if it was encircled or if they were allowed or not. But they were stationed there when the Eritreans arrived the first few days. They arrived on the 19th. So they arrived there and they were stationed there, and they were just warning them that they should go back to Eritrea. On November 23rd, at around 6 a.m., heavy fighting broke out in Hetzat's town. Witness said mid-morning Tigrayan militias armed with Kalashnikov assault rifles, recognized by some refugees as town residents, entered the refugee camps from at least two directions and started shooting at refugees around the camp's Orthodox church. A 28-year-old refugee said 3 Tigray militia fighters stopped him along with 2 friends and his relatives as they headed to the church for services. So this is November 23rd, like early morning, 6 a.m. So the fight broke, and he was on his way to, I think that's the one that you're talking about, Brombras. And that was November 23rd was a Monday morning. They didn't give us much time. They said, you're Sha'abiyah. So that's what they said to them. Eritrean forces are killing us, and you have the luxury of going to the church. So it was just like some form of retaliation that was taking place. We're just going to go fast forward. Because on that day, it kind of outlines what happened specifically on that day. And then late November, on November 26th, following the violence inside Hetzat's camp, Eritrean forces called the refugees to a meeting and told them to leave the camp. The meeting was short, no questions asked, said the refugee who was in attendance. It was just an order. Most refugees reportedly ignored the order to leave. After the meeting, Eritrean forces detained between 20 and 30 refugees who were reportedly identified on a list of refugee committee members and perceived opposition supporters, 2 of them women. One refugee said the Eritrean forces had informants in the camp. We were so scared we didn't trust each other anymore, and we did not dare to speak amongst ourselves. The detained refugees were held at the camp for 2 days, then taken away in Eritrean military vehicles. Their whereabouts remain unknown. So this is like enforced disappearance. So they took some of the people, 20 to 30 people, and these people were considered to be amongst the people who were the refugee committee members, taking care of the refugee camps, amongst the refugees themselves, and there were informants in the refugee camp as well. So that's enforced disappearance. And then killing, rape, detention, looting by Tigray militias early December. So this was on the 26th of November. And also early December, that's on the 5th of December when Eritreans left. The Eritrean force pulled out of Hitsas camp in early December after heavy fighting around Adaga Hebret, south of Hitsas. Local residents reported on December 5th at about 6 p.m. Tigrayan forces entered the camp and began shooting indiscriminately, injuring a woman and sending hundreds of refugees fleeing. During the conflict's first month, the Tigrayan fighters were made up predominantly of the region's special police forces, as well as local militia forces, which traditionally include retired soldiers. The extent of the special forces' command and control over the militias in the initial month of the conflict was unclear. Later in the fighting, the Tigrayan forces self-branded as the Tigrayan Defense Forces. So it's the same militia that later on became TDF. So when it comes to, that's what I was talking about, when it comes to responsibility and accountability, at some point, this should be the approach that people have on both sides. Obviously, on the Eritrean side, we know it's the Eritrean military forces that are doing this. But in the very beginning, the command and control over the militias wasn't very clear in the beginning of the conflict. And we're talking about November. That's early in the conflict. So the Human Rights Watch itself spoke to a few people and gathered some information. 2 refugees said that Tigrayan militia fighters and civilians armed with blunt weapons, including knives, and encircled dozens of refugees at night, then threw a grenade at them. One survivor said, "They brought us towards an old riverbed with a hole where they would dig for gold. We were only held there for about 15 minutes before a grenade was thrown. We did not manage to flee far as we were encircled by people shooting." Several refugees said the militia fighters dropped them of the few possessions they carried. A 33-year-old man said 20 Tigrayan militiamen stopped him along with his cousin, his cousin's pregnant wife, and their children. They told us to go back to our camp. Then they stole everything we had with us, but we were alive, and so we were relieved. So just say it became a matter of survival, nothing more. 2 refugee women said that Tigrayan militia fighters raped them, along with 4 other women, when they escaped from the camp. A 27-year-old said that she and her 17-year-old sister were raped. So this is another rape report that we're having from, I think it's the same one that they mentioned above, the 27-year-old with her 17-year-old sister. Yeah.
I would like to just point out, for people who doesn't know what militia are. So militia are normally in a village. You have some people that helps with the security, and they are just normal people who just happen to have a gun. So, yeah, the point is that even though the militia were incorporated in the Tigray Defense Forces was made up of everyone, not only militia, but people who have never carried gun before. But we have to consider what we are talking about. Normally, a militia are people that have normal life. So they are, I mean, when I say normal life, they are farmers. So they are the farmers like everybody else. They have a gun so they help the community in security. So they are not the people that are trained. They are not the people, the kind of, you cannot consider them like police or soldiers. So they are just farmers, but they have guns to help with the security of the community. So we should know. If we don't know, then we could ask people around us what militias are and what kind of people they are. So that's actually what's happening now. The Ethiopian government is bringing militia into the war, and that some experts say the reason that they are losing some part of the war is because the militia, they are the people that are not trained well. So we should all take into consideration when we blame them. So I'm not saying wrong is wrong. I'm not trying to change it, but we should always consider what's happening around. And there is also another news in the Vice that's now out. Vice World News, written by Zacharias Zelalem. If you haven't heard about him, then he writes a lot about Ethiopia. He's an Ethiopian and comes in the Al Jazeera often. And so he have written about how the Ethiopian villages were being ransacked and some of them even burned by the Eritrean soldiers. So what's happening might be, from what is written there, it looks like what was happening was ethnic cleansing. I think until now, what we have heard about ethnic cleansing is from the government of United States. They talked about the ethnic cleansing of Tigrayans in the western part of Tigray. But now it looks like they might have been done the same by not only by the Amhara militias, but also by Eritrean soldiers. So this is also something to bear in mind, and we should also consider how the feeling of the people at that time. So that's. But I believe we could work on that, and it's very good that we know how the Eritrean, at this time, the two Eritrean refugee camps are in the war zone, because the war is now within Amhara for the most part, in the Amhara region, and the refugee camps are at the border between Amhara and Tigray. So it's very important that we understand how bad the situation is for the Eritrean refugees, which many of them have been there for many years because they don't have relatives. Those who have normally moves to Addis Ababa. So it's very important that, if there is anything we could do, we all cooperate and try to help them.
So as I said earlier, the report, or Human Rights Watch, had sent few letters to. They sent a letter to the Eritrean government, the embassy of the permanent mission of the state of Eritrea in Geneva. They also sent a letter to the UNHCR representative in Ethiopia, and they also sent a third letter to the Administration for Refugees and Returnees Affairs in Ethiopia. So they sent 3 letters, and they asked questions. And I'll start with the one that they sent to the Administration for Refugees and Returnees Affairs, the Ethiopian one, and the question that they asked, like, for each of the camps, we would appreciate answers to the following questions in as much detail as possible, as well as any other information that will help us shed light on the events. First question: how many of the Eritrean refugees believed to be present in Tigray at the time that the conflict broke out in November, including in camps, outside of camps, and at the Indabaguna reception center? Has ARRA been able to account for how many are still unaccounted for? Have you been able to confirm the number of Eritrean refugees who have returned to Eritrea since November? Question number 3. In December 2020 and January 2021, ARRA returned to Tigray refugees who had fled fighting in Tigray to Addis Ababa. Please, can you spell out how many refugees were returned and what options were provided for them, including for those who refused to return? How many have since been accounted for in Ma'ini and Ad Harush, respectively? Could you explain why UN agencies were not able to access Shimalba and Hetzaz until March 2021? We understand that since August 4th, 2021, area with the support from the UNHCR has been issuing temporary identification documents to refugees from Hetzaz and Shimalba who have sought refuge in Addis Ababa. Who is eligible for these documents? What assistance they get? So these are some of the questions that they asked, and obviously they asked about the reason why the UN agencies were unable to get into the camps until March 2021. So that's a very, very long time, almost 5 months before the UN agencies getting into them. Some of the other questions also they asked the UNHCR were how many Eritrean refugees believed to be present in the Tigray during the time of the conflict. Similar questions. Also the follow-up about the refugees. Have you been able to confirm the number of Eritrean refugees who have returned to Eritrea since November? Why was the UNHCR unable to access the camps before March 26th? So we're talking about 5 months exactly. And the UNHCR and also the Ethiopians responded, but unfortunately the Eritrean government hasn't responded. And it's obviously they're not going to respond because they are fully and in it, and they did what they did with the full knowledge of it. So some of the questions that they asked the Eritrean government is, could you state when Eritrean force arrived and left Hetzaz and Shimalba camps between November 2020 and January 2021? Could you provide details on the number of registered refugees from the Tigray region who have returned to Eritrea since November 2020? What was the process for their return? How have you ensured they received necessary assistance? Have you investigated reports that Eritrean forces committed abuse in and around the Hetzaz and Shimalba camps? If so, who is carrying out these investigations, and what is the status of these investigations? Could you account for the whereabouts of the dozens of Eritrean refugees whom Eritrean forces allegedly detained in Hetzaz and Shimalba in November 2020? If true, why did Eritrean forces destroy parts of Hetzaz camp in January 2021? What steps did Eritrean forces take to allow humanitarian access to Shimalba and Hetzaz while the forces were occupying these camps? Could you explain why UN agencies allegedly were not able to access Shimalba and Hetzaz camps between November 2020 and March 2021? So these are the questions that they asked. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to the response, but also they did provide some recommendations, and these recommendations could be good, but I believe for the Eritrean refugees, as Eritreans, what we should be advocating for is to get them to a safer country. They have to leave Ethiopia as of right now, and the reason is because Ethiopia isn't safe for them anymore, let alone Tigray. So the whole of Ethiopia isn't safe. Even if we say Addis Ababa or any other place like in the Amhara region, another refugee camp was established, but all of these places are not a safe place for them. One, Eritrea or Eritrean forces are freely operating, especially in the areas where in the northern part of Ethiopia, and that's not a safe place to operate in. Secondly, because of the state of security that Ethiopia is in, Eritrean refugees are even becoming more unsafe. So I think for what our recommendation would be for people who are here, and also if if you're speaking about it, I think we should be advocating for Eritrean refugees to be to evacuate, to leave the country, to be taken to a third country where they can be resettled and their safety is guaranteed. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about this issue over and over again. The war is still ongoing. We don't know how long it's going to take. It could take longer than we expect. It could be over very soon. By the looks of it, there isn't any prospect of the war, stopping anytime soon. Maybe not within the next few weeks. And every day could mean that a loss of another, dozens of people, refugees and non-refugees. But for at least for the refugees, that is not the country that they belong to, and that's why we say like let's resettle them to a third country. And I think if people go to the UNHCR website, there are contact details that you can contact them, at least ask more information. You can ask for we can organize petitions and all of that. I think this can only be driven if we have to drive it. Otherwise, no one is gonna do it. And I think we should be concerned about our brothers and sisters, and also we should be concerned about anyone who is stuck in that in the refugee camps. If people in the audience have anything to add, please do come up, so that we can at least hear different points of view. Brombras, if you have any final remarks to make, and then we end the room.
Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Hello? Yes. The only thing that I say is I think we should try our best to ask for relocation, because we are already hearing what's happening to Eritrean refugees that were caught crossing from Ethiopia to Kenya, and that was the only thing they did. It wasn't a crime, something special, and they were refugees. Some of them had refugee papers, UNHCR papers, but still, as I have heard, the judge have decided that they should be returned back to Eritrea. So if this kind of things are starting already, and we already see that the Eritrean soldiers were in Megala, and now there is maybe not confirmed, but Eritrean soldiers are in the war in Amhara, in Davat, and Dese. So it looks like that the suffering of the Eritrean refugees might not be over. So I think it's very important that maybe try to make a little bit organized campaign to move the Eritrean refugees safely out of Ethiopia. It was a little bit fortunate before because of the peace or relative peace that was present in Tigray. They were able to live and live in peace and harmony with the people of Tigray, but now it looks like things are getting worse. And I think it would be unrealistic if we are to expect the same treatment as before with the current challenges, because we have in Tigray there is a challenge of food, electricity, and everything right now, and Eritreans will definitely suffer like the Tigrayans there. So I believe that we should all be concerned, and there is also news, like I have said a little bit earlier, written in the Vice World News by Zakaris Delalam, survivor testimonies and satellite images in Ethiopian northern region. And if what is written there is true, then what the Eritrean defense forces have done, the atrocities are just starting. It talks about people being burned alive in their own homes, and villages intentionally burned down. So I really hope that is not true. But what I'm trying to say is that so the suffering of the refugees might be just starting. So I think it's very important that we as Eritreans, we know what the people of Ethiopia have done to our refugees earlier, and we understand the suffering of the Tigray people right now they're passing. But at the same time, I believe, and I think everybody believes, that Ethiopia is not safe for Eritreans anymore. So we should try to appeal to UNHCR for relocation, not like what it was being said by UNHCR before a few days or weeks, moving them to Amhara region, but moving them to another country is the only I think it's the only choice that we have. We should advocate for that. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think relocation or resettlement to a different country should be the only and one option. Otherwise, even the war is coming out of the Tigray, the region of Tigray, to the Amhara region, to the Afar region, and nowhere is safe. And because they don't belong to these regions, they would be seen as the outsiders, and they would be the vulnerable wherever they go within Ethiopia, especially in the Amhara region, in the Tigray region. So saying that they can be relocated within these different regions, and new refugee camps can be established, I think it's not the right approach to that issue. I think the absolute issue would be to relocate them to a third country, to take them out of that, and that has to happen using the UN agencies, not refugees crossing borders, and then they'd be seen as like as that would be considered as trespass, and they would be probably be imprisoned and all of that. But if there is an agreement between these countries and the UN agencies, then these refugees would be relocated or resettled using the legal ways. They would be taken from these refugee camps to a place where they could be safer. I'll go through the recommendations of the report, and then we close the room. So the recommendations that they have are: all parties to Ethiopia's armed conflict should immediately cease attack and abuses against Eritrean refugees and other civilians. They should respect the humanitarian nature of refugee camps and do not deploy forces there. They should facilitate humanitarian access and freedom of movements for all refugees. The Ethiopian government should, with international support, provide immediate and adequate emergency assistance, including medical care, food and shelter, to the thousands of refugees and asylum seekers currently displaced outside of camps, including in Shiraro, Adigrat, and Addis Ababa. They should identify and support those at particular risk or with specific needs, including women, the high caseload of unaccompanied and separated minors and other children, older people, and people with disabilities. The government should also ensure the physical safety of refugees within its territory, including by protecting Eritrean refugees from Eritrean and other armed forces and groups, ensuring humanitarian access to all refugee camps and conflict areas, and committing to not forcibly returning Eritrean refugees to Eritrea or to areas where their lives and security would be at risk. Any UN-led international investigation into alleged international crimes in the Tigray region should include an investigation into warring parties' actions against Eritrean refugees and protected humanitarian infrastructure. Tigrayan armed forces should ensure the protection of Eritrean refugees in areas under their control, including through ensuring humanitarian access to all refugee camps, freedom of movement for all refugees, and cooperating with international investigation into abuse against Eritrean refugees. Ethiopia, Eritrea, and UNHCR should cooperate to account for the whereabouts and well-being of the thousands of refugees from Hitsat and Shimalba camps and throughout Tigray still unaccounted for. And UNHCR and affected governments should accelerate the handling of pending cases of third country resettlement for Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia as a highly vulnerable group. And I think that sums it up, and that's what we're calling for. I think the UNHCR and all other governments should handle Eritrean case as a highly vulnerable group, and this pending case shouldn't be pending anymore. They need to facilitate the resettlement process ASAP. It is not something that can wait. People's lives are at risk, and nowhere in Ethiopia right now is safe for the Eritrean refugees. I'll pass it to my colleague here, Amira, if you have any final remarks to make, and then we end the session for today.
I don't have any more remarks to say about the video. But I think it's very important to realize that the issues that the refugees are facing it is not something they should be encountering. they have fled their country because of the atrocities that they were facing, and they seek refuge in this country. And I think it's important for us to start advocating, campaigning for the removal or immediate removal of the refugees from the region, as they're not safe, whether it is by the attacks targeted towards them by the Eritrean forces or the Tigray forces, or even as far as I could say maybe even the Ethiopian forces in the region. So I think that's the first step, is to ensuring their safety and protecting the Eritrean refugees, allowing any humanitarian access that is required to providing them any medical attention, food, shelter, ensuring that these individuals are accounted for, and any risk that is faced by them neutralized immediately, especially women and children in the region. But other than that, I think we need to start talking about ways of protecting them rather than just, protecting them, and how can we move forward by creating campaigns or, putting pressure on both the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments to ensure their safety. But yeah, thank you, Ismail, for all that you mentioned. And thank you. Sorry, I can't say your name. I can't read your name, but I'm just going to say Meron for your contribution as well. Thank you, Tasfa, as well.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Meron, by the way. I don't know, I just put it on breast. Well, my name is Meron.
Yeah, thank you, Meron. Tasfu, do you have any final remarks to make? I know you said you're busy. If you have any final remarks to make, then because we're just going to close the room shortly, so we're just making our final remarks. I guess he's busy. So this is the beginning of the conversation, everyone who is here. So let's take this step forward. Let's try to reach out to the different organizations and groups that we have around us. UNHCR is highly accessible, especially online. If we can email them. Use the website, the Geneva one, not the local one, because sometimes when you Google the UNHCR, what comes out is the local UNHCR, the country where you reside in. So let's try to use the UNHCR, the Geneva one, the headquarters. Try to email them and speak about the Eritrean refugees in Tigray. I think the more pressure that we put, the easier it becomes for them to act, because the more people speak to them, they would act. Eritrean government doesn't care, and it doesn't want to care anymore. And we heard that when they were asked, they didn't respond, and the fact that they didn't respond is like they care less, and we shouldn't be deceived by what they say, especially in Clubhouse when they talk about Eritrean refugees and we want to protect them and all of that. It's just a lies that they're trying to propagate for them to be seen as people who are protecting Eritrean refugees. If anything, they are the people who are affecting the lives of Eritrean refugees in Tigray, and they are the reason why these Eritrean refugees had in the very first place they left the country. So you can't be the reason for their pain, and also the reason for for the cure for what's happening to them. So yeah, I guess thank you everyone we'll finish it here. Thank you everyone for being here with us this evening. Please do take this conversation with you to your smaller circles, and I hope we in the coming weeks and days we shed more light on this issue. Thanks.